Charles Altman was a man used to silence. His mansion was always quiet, his words always short, his life always busy. Money surrounded him, but warmth did not. He had built walls of stone and glass, walls that even his only son, Justin, could not climb. Justin was 9 years old. He was a boy who lived in silence too, but not by choice. He was autistic, and he rarely spoke. He spent most of his time sitting alone, eyes fixed on things no one else cared to notice. Doctors had tried, therapists had tried, teachers had tried. Nothing worked. Charles paid for the best, but the boy stayed in his own world. Then came Sarah. Sarah was new in the mansion. She had only been there for a few days. She was quiet, hard-working, and carried no fancy background. She came from a simple life and was thankful just to have a job. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, had warned her about the boy. "Don't disturb him," she said. "He doesn't like people near him." Sarah had nodded. She wasn't one to argue. That morning, her duty was the garage. She thought it would be an easy task, just dusting shelves, wiping down the cars, maybe sweeping the floor. But when she opened the door, she froze. Justin was already there. He sat cross-legged on the smooth concrete floor, his small body still, his eyes locked on the open hood of the red car. He didn't notice her. His little fingers traced shapes in the air, as if he were drawing invisible lines over the engine. Sarah stood quietly. She remembered her cousin back home, who'd been the same way, silent, distant, but alive in his own way. She knew sudden moves could break the moment. So, instead of speaking, she slipped to the side and began to wipe a shelf slowly. Minutes passed. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of Justin's breathing. Sarah's eyes kept drifting back to him. There was something peaceful in the way he stared at the car, like the engine was speaking a language only he could hear. Then Sarah did something she hadn't planned. She stepped closer, knelt beside the car, but kept her distance. Her voice came out soft, almost like a whisper. "That's a fan belt," she said, pointing gently at the part. Justin didn't react. His eyes stayed on the engine. She tried again, her tone calm and steady. "Oil cap," she said, pointing to another part. Then, "spark plug." For a moment, nothing changed. But Sarah noticed the boy's eyes flicker toward where her finger had pointed, just for a second. Small, but real. She didn't cheer or call attention to it. She simply nodded to herself and kept going. Day after day, she returned to the garage. At first, no one cared. The other staff thought the garage was just a storage space anyway. But to Sarah, it became something more. Each morning, she'd find Justin already waiting there, always by the red car. The second day, he glanced at her once before turning back to the engine. That tiny glance felt like a welcome. The third day, when she named a part, he tilted his head as if he were thinking about it. By the end of the week, he started tapping his fingers whenever she pointed to something new. Sarah began bringing little objects with her: a cup, a bottle cap, a string. She used them to show how the engine worked. She rolled the cap and said, "Spark plug." She tapped the cup and said, "Cylinder." She stretched the string and said, "Belt." She never forced him to touch, but one day he did. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and tapped the cap with one finger. Sarah's heart jumped, but her face stayed calm. She just nodded, whispering, "Yes." From that moment, a quiet bridge began to form. Justin didn't speak, but he copied her gestures. When she made a circle with her hand to show a piston moving, he did the same. When she twisted her fingers to show gears turning, he tried to follow. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Sarah didn't tell anyone. Not Mrs. Davis, not Anna the nanny, not even the cook, Mrs. Brown. She didn't want to risk losing this fragile connection. It felt like it belonged to her and Justin alone. One afternoon, as she sat with Justin showing him how the belt connected to the alternator, she heard a faint sound behind her. Footsteps. The small door that led from the house to the garage was slightly open. Her eyes flicked up and froze. Charles Altman was standing there. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His tie was loose from a long day at work, his phone in one hand, but his eyes were locked on the scene in front of him. His son wasn't rocking back and forth in silence. He wasn't lost in his own world. He was sitting beside the maid, copying her hand motions, following her gestures, focused and calm. For years, Charles had tried everything money could buy. And yet, in front of him, his son was responding not to a doctor, not to a specialist, but to a maid. His jaw tightened. His grip on the phone stiffened. He didn't know whether to be angry, confused, or relieved. Sarah, still on the floor, didn't move. She feared she would be scolded, maybe even fired, but she didn't stop. She pointed to the engine again, her voice steady. "That's the timing chain," she said softly. Justin's eyes followed her finger, steady and sure. Charles stayed frozen at the door, staring at his son like he had never seen him before. And in that moment, something shifted. That night, Charles could not sleep. He kept seeing the same picture in his mind, his son, Justin, sitting in the garage beside Sarah, touching the engine parts with focus and calm. It was something he had never seen before. All the money he had spent, all the doctors and experts, none of them had brought that kind of change. And yet, the maid had. The next morning, Charles found Sarah wiping the counter in the kitchen. She froze when she noticed him. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his voice cut through the silence. "Come with me." Sarah swallowed hard, dropped the cloth on the counter, and followed him down the hall. He led her into his study, closed the door, and leaned against his desk. His eyes were sharp. "What exactly are you doing with my son?" Sarah's hands shook. She clasped them together to keep steady. Her voice came out soft but clear. "I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. I didn't want to interfere. But your son, he looks at that car like it makes sense to him. So I sat with him. I pointed to parts. I spoke softly. He didn't push me away. He didn't leave. He stayed." Charles crossed his arms, staring hard at her. She continued, her courage growing. "He began to follow my gestures. Sometimes he touched the objects. Sometimes he copied my movements. It's like the car is his language. I don't know how else to say it. I think it's how he understands the world." For a long moment, the room was silent. Charles's face stayed stern, but his eyes shifted. He slowly sat down behind his desk. "I've spent years with doctors," he said. His voice was quieter now. "Clinics, therapists, specialists. I've paid for everything. But nothing changed. He never made eye contact, never showed interest. I thought it would always be like that. I thought maybe that was just who he was." He paused, rubbing his forehead, then looked back at her. "But yesterday, I saw something different. He wasn't just sitting there. He was with you. He was focused. He was learning." Sarah lowered her eyes, not sure what he would decide. Finally, Charles leaned forward, his voice steady. "I want you to keep doing it. Whatever this is, it's the first real change I've seen. From now on, you'll report directly to me. Use the garage whenever you need. If you require anything, tell me." Sarah blinked, surprised. Relief mixed with fear in her chest. She nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I'll keep it simple, no pressure. Just the car, just little steps." Charles gave a single nod. "Good." That afternoon, Sarah went back to the garage as usual. Justin was already there, sitting by the red car. He glanced at her once, then returned to the engine. Sarah smiled faintly and knelt beside him. She pointed softly. "Radiator." Justin tapped his fingers twice, a small rhythm. Sarah kept her tone calm, her gestures steady. Every part she showed, he followed with his eyes. Sometimes his hand twitched toward it, sometimes he tilted his head, thinking. From then on, Charles began to watch. Not openly, not boldly, he stayed hidden near the door or stood in the hallway, just far enough away. He didn't want to interrupt. He just watched, and what he saw stirred something inside him. Day after day, he witnessed his son copying Sarah's gestures, holding objects, tracing lines on the engine. He saw Justin's silence become softer, less empty. There was focus now. Connection. One afternoon, Charles stood at the door while Sarah laid a small washer in Justin's palm. "This feels smooth," she said gently. Like oil. Justin pressed the washer with his thumb. Then, without being asked, he stood and walked to the car. He pointed directly at the oil cap, then looked back at Sarah. Charles's breath caught. He had never seen his son do something like that before. His throat tightened, and for a moment he had to turn away so they wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. That evening, when the house was quiet, Charles found himself in the garage alone. The red car sat with its hood open. On the floor were some of the small objects, Sarah U-string caps, drawings. He picked up one of the drawings, a simple sketch of a piston. He stared at it for a long time, then sat down where Sarah always sat. For once, he just breathed. The garage, once only a place for cars, now felt alive. The next morning, Sarah walked into the garage earlier than usual. To her surprise, Charles was already there. He stood by the car, holding a small engine part in his hand. His tie was loose, his face tired, but his eyes were softer. "I've seen this piece 100 times," he said quietly, "but today it feels like the first." Sarah stepped closer.
"What is it?"
He turned it in his hand, then offered it to her. "Ignition coil, I think." She took it, nodded. "Yes, that's right." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Charles sighed. "I used to come here sometimes, late at night." The garage was quiet, controlled. "That's what I've always wanted, control. In my business, in my life. Even with Justin, I thought if I just followed the plan, paid for the best, it would work." His voice lowered. "But connection, I never knew how to reach him. Not until I saw what you did. You didn't force him to come to you. You went to him, through this car." Sarah looked down, her fingers brushing the coil. "My brother was like Justin," she said softly. "He didn't speak much, but I learned to listen in other ways with his eyes, his hands, his silence. He passed away when I was 17. He was my best friend. That's why I noticed Justin. The look in his eyes, I recognized it." Charles raised his eyes to hers. There was no hardness there anymore, only something raw, vulnerability. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was real. Finally, Sarah handed the coil back. "It's a small part," she said, "but without it, the engine doesn't start." Charles looked at the piece, then at her. His expression softened. "I'll remember that." From then on, the garage was no longer just Sarah and Justin's place. Quietly, carefully, Charles began to step inside too. Sometimes he only stood by the wall, sometimes he sat on the floor near them. He didn't always speak, but he was present. And for the first time in years, Justin didn't pull away from his father. He let him stay. Something was beginning to change. The change in the Altman mansion was quiet at first, but real. Justin was calmer. He tapped his fingers less, hummed less, and instead watched Sarah's hand gestures closely. Sometimes he copied her. Sometimes he surprised her by pointing before she even named a part. Every day felt like another small step forward, and Charles noticed. He no longer stayed hidden in the hallway. More often, he stood in the garage with them. At first he only watched, but slowly he joined in. He picked up tools, showed Justin how to trace shapes, even knelt on the cold floor in his expensive suit just to be part of the moment. For the first time in years, the father felt like he was with his son, not watching him from afar, not waiting for progress from strangers, but sharing space with him. But not everyone saw it the same way. One afternoon, a kitchen assistant named Emily rushed into the staff room, holding her phone. Her eyes were wide. "Sarah," she whispered, "you need to see this." Sarah frowned. wiping her hands on her apron, and looked at the screen. Her breath caught. It was a photo, blurry but clear enough. She was kneeling beside the red car, pointing at the engine, with Justin by her side. And behind them, half in shadow, stood Charles Altman. The headline made her stomach sink. Millionaire falls under Maid spell strange bond, raising eyebrows. The article didn't talk about connection or healing. It painted her as someone who had taken advantage of a vulnerable child to get close to his rich father. It accused her of manipulation, of using Justin's condition to win Charles's trust. Sarah's knees weakened. She sat down slowly, her eyes locked on the cruel words. Emily bit her lip. It's spreading fast. By evening, the story had reached business circles. Charles's phone rang non-stop. Partners, board members, even distant relatives all had something to say. Charles, you need to be careful. This doesn't look good. It's not about truth. It's about image. People are saying she's using the boy to get to you. The pressure was heavy, suffocating. That same night, Charles sat alone in his study, staring at the screen of his laptop. The picture of Sarah and Justin was everywhere, now online forums, gossip sites, even financial blogs. The words stung: opportunist, gold digger, unqualified. His phone buzzed again. It was his cousin, Mark. She's a nobody, Mark said bluntly. She's playing you. Don't be blind, Charles. Get rid of her before it ruins your reputation. Charles didn't answer. He simply hung up, but the weight pressed harder on his chest. In the mansion, the air grew tense. Staff whispered in corners. Sarah felt the stares as she passed. She didn't need anyone to tell her what was coming. She went to her room that night, sat on her small bed, and read the article again. This time, the tears came. Not for herself, but for Justin. She thought of his small hand tapping the washer, his quiet hum when she showed him the flashlight, the way he looked at her as if she understood him. She didn't want to make his life harder. She didn't want her presence to bring him pain. So she made a choice. Early the next morning, before the sun was up, Sarah packed her few belongings into a small bag. She folded her uniform neatly and placed it on the bed. She didn't write a note. She didn't wait for anyone to stop her. Quietly, she walked through the back door and out of the mansion. When Justin went to the garage that morning, he sat down by the red car, as usual. He waited. Minutes passed, then hours. Sarah never came. At first, he simply rocked gently, tapping his fingers. But as the day went on, his movements grew sharper. He paced back and forth. He breathed faster. When Anna, the nanny, tried to guide him inside, he screamed, knocking toys off the shelf. He curled under the table, his little body shaking. By afternoon, the house was in chaos. Mrs. Davis called Charles at work. "You need to come home. It's Justin. Something is very wrong." Charles left his meeting without a word. When he arrived at the mansion, he found his son in the garage, rocking hard, clutching the small drawing of a piston Sarah had once made for him. His humming was loud, desperate. His eyes were red from tears. Charles knelt beside him. "Justin, I'm here. Daddy's here." But Justin didn't look at him. His fingers tapped the paper frantically, like he was trying to start an engine that wouldn't turn on. And in that moment, Charles understood. It wasn't Sarah who had manipulated anything. She hadn't been a danger, hadn't been a scheme. She had been the bridge. The only one who had reached his son. The only one who had given him peace. Now that bridge was gone, and Justin was falling back into the silence he had just begun to leave. Charles's chest tightened. He stood, jaw clenched, and stormed out of the garage. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't call the board. He didn't think of his reputation. He thought only of Sarah. He found her in a small apartment on Maple Street. The agency had placed her there temporarily. When she opened the door and saw him, her eyes widened. She looked tired, but calm. She didn't ask why he had come. Charles stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. His voice cracked. But he didn't care. I messed up. I let people tell me lies. I forgot what I saw with my own eyes. Sarah, Justin isn't the same without you. You didn't just help him. You gave him something no one else could. Not even me. Sarah's eyes grew wet, but she stayed quiet. Charles stepped forward, his voice steady now. I'm not asking you to come back as a maid. I'm asking you to come back as part of us, as part of a family. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was full of meaning. Sarah lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about work. It was about something bigger. Months had passed since Sarah stepped back into the Altman mansion, but the house was no longer the same. The garage, once just a place for cars and silence, had transformed into something alive. The red car still stood in the middle with its hood open, but now the space carried laughter, small voices, and hands moving in rhythm. It started quietly. Sarah returned, and Justin's calm slowly came back. He went to the garage every morning, waiting for her. At first, it was just the two of them again. But soon, word spread. A neighbor heard about Justin's progress. Then another parent asked if their child could visit. Before long, 5 children came regularly. Like Justin, they struggled with words, with connection, with being understood. Sarah didn't turn anyone away. She welcomed them into the garage, the same way she had welcomed Justin, gently, without pressure. She laid out objects, safe tools, and simple drawings. She showed them how to touch, how to feel, how to copy movements. No one was forced to speak, but over time, they did. A sound here, a word there, a smile, a touch, a shared rhythm. Charles watched it unfold with quiet wonder. He had once spent millions on clinics and programs, but what was happening in his own garage was more powerful than all of them. He didn't try to take credit. He simply supported. He funded supplies, paid for safe equipment, even arranged transport for families who couldn't afford it. He gave the project a name, the workshop, but everyone still called it Sarah's workshop. For Justin, the change was clear. He began saying small words: fan, wheel, chain. Sometimes he even put 2 together, turnkey, big noise. Each word felt like a victory. One morning, as Sarah was setting up, Justin surprised her. He looked at her, his dark eyes steady, and whispered softly, "Sarah." Her breath caught. She froze, afraid it was only in her imagination. But then he said it again, a little clearer. "Sarah." Her eyes filled with tears. She knelt down, placed her hand gently on his, and nodded. "Yes, that's me." From that day, Justin used her name often. It wasn't perfect, not always clear, but it was real. The workshop became more than just a program. It became a place of healing. Parents who had once felt hopeless now sat on the floor beside their children, watching them make sounds, touch objects, and connect in ways they had thought impossible. Charles was no longer the cold man who stood at a distance. He was there every morning, handing out tools, showing kids how to trace shapes on the floor, and even laughing softly when something funny happened. For the first time, he was not just a provider, he was a father. But the biggest change was between him and Sarah. One evening, when the garage was quiet and the children had gone, Sarah leaned against the red car, her eyes closed. That car had witnessed everything: the first day she met Justin, the first time he copied her hand, the first word he ever spoke. Charles walked in, carrying a small metal part in his hand. He stood beside her, silent for a moment. Then he turned the piece slowly in his fingers. "Never thought something broken could fix so much," he said softly. Sarah opened her eyes, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the heart just needs a new engine." Their eyes met. For the first time, there was no wall between them, no title of boss and maid, no distance of wealth and class. Just two people standing together, changed by the same child. Charles extended his hand to her, not as a demand, not as an order, but as a man reaching out. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The silence around them was not empty anymore. It was full. The workshop continued to grow, but Sarah kept it simple. She didn't let it become a business. Every child who walked through the garage doors was treated the same way Justin had been. No pressure, only patience. No judgment, only presence. One afternoon, as the children traced tools on the floor, Justin climbed into the red car. He placed his small hands on the steering wheel, his lips moving. "Motor," he whispered. Charles and Sarah exchanged a glance. Both smiled quietly. The boy who once lived behind walls was breaking through, one sound at a time. And together his father and the maid, who became more than just help, they would be there to listen.